Today, what I'm going to show you is how to purchase a used car. Now, there are a lot of things to cover. Please consider subscribing if you haven't already. It's completely free to subscribe. So without further ado, let's get into it. So now, when you're going to inspect the vehicle, always try to ask the owner if at all they cannot start the engine, because you want it to be stone cold when you're actually going to inspect the vehicle. So now the first thing we're going to do is we are going to check the engine oil. So what you want to do is, when the engine is cold, you want to pull the dipstick out, and then you want to clear off any of the oil here. Now what you're looking for is, you're looking for like a milkshake sort of looking thing. It looks like chocolate milk or chocolate yogurt. If you see that, then that would probably indicate that a head gasket leak has actually occurred. So those are the things you need to check for. So now what you want to do is, you want to put the dipstick all the way back in again until you click it back down. And then you're going to pull it out, and then you're going to hold it level. And as you can see, that's the maximum line. Open up the engine oil filler cap. Look for like chocolate milk substance, and as you can see, no chocolate milk substance at all. Under the valve cover here, what you're going to do is, you're going to put your hand around this area, and what you're going to look for is any metallic flakes, or if at all you see like chocolate milk, then that could be, let's say, timing chain wear or something. Could be metallic flakes, and chocolate milk could be things like a head gasket leak where the coolant has mixed with the engine oil. And also, you can also check in the coolant reservoir. I'm going to show you what to check shortly. So now I'm relatively happy. The next thing you'll need to check is the cooling system. So what you need to do here is, you need to pull out the expansion tank cover. And now what you can do is check underneath here to see if at all you can see any fibers in there. Now, if you can see any sort of fiber in there, then what it could be is, it could be head gasket sealer. Now, certain head gasket sealers kind of form like a fiber thing after some time, so that's what I want to look for. So as you can see, the coolant inside is nice and bright pink. So Toyota uses bright pink coolant for their newer vehicles. This is a 2012 Toyota Camry. It's a 4-cylinder engine. Now, you want to make sure that it is using the correct coolant, because if you see something like a green color coolant, yes, it might be usable, but it's not what the manufacturer recommended, and that could indicate that they are using a cheaper coolant than what is recommended. Green doesn't always mean it's cheap, but you always want to make sure that they're using what's recommended by the manufacturer. So the same thing, this is the radiator cap, and what you're going to do is turn the radiator cap and open it. As you can see, it's nice and it's pink, and there are no pieces of fiber in there, which could be from head gasket sealer. Let's say if somebody tried to shaft you, they could head gasket seal the engine. So for those of you who do not know what a head gasket is, so basically this is your engine valve cover, and here is where the camshaft is, and then the timing chain is also there. Now there's two portions of the engine. So you got your engine block, which is right down the bottom, and then you've got your cylinder head. Your cylinder head, the bottom of your cylinder head and the engine block, in between is actually a head gasket. Now if that starts leaking, then coolant will get into your engine oil. The exhaust gases will get into the coolant expansion tank as well as your cooling system, and the coolant will also get into the combustion chamber, and therefore exhaust gases can actually get into the cooling system. Now what we're doing here is, we're not doing our pre-purchase inspection and then we're saying it's all good. Well, for me it is, but for you guys, if you don't know much about cars, what you're doing is, you're filtering to see if you are happy that you're going to purchase this car, and then get a pre-purchaser to look at it. All right, so what you guys can do also is, if you do suspect maybe there's a head gasket leak or whatever, you can ask your technician to do a block tester, which is your engine block tester. And what they do is, they actually hook it up to your filler cap, and then what they'll do is, they'll press this thing. It's basically a blue color liquid which changes to yellow if at all you do have a head gasket leak. So that's one way to check it, but you're just doing all the basic checks for now. The next thing we're going to do is, we're going to test the battery with a multimeter. So what you're going to do now is we're going to turn it on, and then we're going to turn it to DC volt 20. Touch the positive on the positive, negative on the negative, and as you can see, that's 12.38 volts, which means that the battery is very good. Now what we're also going to do is we're going to test the alternator in a while, just some basic tests on the alternator. So now the alternator should be charging the battery. Guys, so as you saw just now when I turned it on and I touched the terminals, positive to positive, negative to negative, you saw it was 12.34 volts just with the battery, and when I started the vehicle you saw it actually climbed to about 14.2, 14.3. That means the alternator is charging the battery properly. So now what you also need to do is you need to turn on the headlights, you can turn on the aircon compressor and things like that, and you should see it start to drop down and then go back up again. That would also mean that the alternator is working properly. Now if you see it just drop to about 12, then your alternator may have issues, so that's another way of actually testing it. This is your brake fluid reservoir. Now for those of you in the US, it'll be on the left hand side because this is always the closest side to the driver. Now this is a right hand drive vehicle, but most of the parts are exactly the same. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull this cap out and I'm going to look in here, and as you can see in here, it looks like a nice thin honey color, and that is quite a healthy brake fluid color, so you don't need to worry about that one. That looks quite good. And when you're putting it back, make sure you hold the cylinder first down the bottom with your hand and then you press it shut. So the other thing we also need to look at is with the airbox. Now you can actually do a quick check through the airbox right here. Just pop these clips. On some cars it's not as easy as this, and then all you can do is you can actually take a peek here and pull the filter out. I have a specific video on how you can change the engine air filter. You can see that, but you might want to just get this one looked at. Now if you see a clean engine air filter, good battery, the coolant is good, that would already show you that the owner does take care of the vehicle quite well. Now the other thing you also need to look at is the parts cost on a vehicle. The water pump on this engine is actually driven by a serpentine belt, yet on some vehicles it's an electronically controlled water pump. So on this engine, about $400, you should be able to sort out a water pump. Alright guys, and this is your alternator. Now that's why we did a basic test on the alternator just now. This alternator shouldn't be too expensive to repair. Probably about $300 should sort you out an alternator, and that's driven by the serpentine belt. Now you will need to also just check and feel the serpentine belt. This is a serpentine belt, which is basically what drives your accessories. The crank shaft drives the crank pulley, and the crank pulley drives the serpentine belt. So this is your alternator, your aircon compressor is down there, and this car does not have a hydraulic power steering. It's got an electronic power steering. So there's no power steering fluid to actually check on this vehicle, but my BMW does have a hydraulic power steering, so I'm going to show you that when I jump onto that car. Now this is a 4-cylinder engine. Now you need to see which type of engine you're going to buy. You got 4 cylinders, you got V6, V8s, and you got a straight 6 as well. I'm going to show you what the differences are. So with this one, you've got 1 cylinder head, you have got 1 valve cover gasket, and you've got 1 valve cover just in case you need to change it. So it's not too expensive to repair on a 4-cylinder engine. Alright guys, you know how I was talking about the water pump earlier? Now if the owner claims that the water pump has been replaced, also make sure that the thermostat has been replaced. They are right adjacent to each other, and while you're already there, might as well replace those things as well. Now what you also need to find out is whether it's a direct injection engine or a multi-point or pod injected engine. So this one here is a multi-point injected engine. So multi-points are much more easier to maintain and they do not have a lot of carbon buildup, whereas your gasoline direct injection engines do have a lot of carbon buildup. So direct injection engines are really good for fuel economy and power, but it's only when they actually suffer the carbon buildup that's when you gotta run into a lot of expensive repairs. And if the fuel injectors fail on a direct injection, you are talking about probably $400 an injector. So the fuel injectors are located around here at the back. You need to find out if the fuel filter and the fuel pump had been replaced at any time. You don't always need to replace the fuel pump, but the fuel filter will need to be replaced if that can cause it to clog up. You need to find out whether your engine is a timing chain engine or a timing belt engine. So basically on the side here over the cam cover, you can see that this one is made of steel on the side. Now if you see plastic right here, that means it's a timing belt. Now a timing belt kit can cost around about $1,000 to replace the whole thing, which would be your idler pulley, your idler bearing, and all those good stuff on the side. Now that is quite expensive, in about $1,000 to do the whole job for a technician to do it for you. Now cam chains, sometimes people overlook doing the water pump because the cam chain basically lasts the life of the engine. Now on certain models of vehicles, the cam chain can actually fail. So if the cam chain can actually stretch, the cam chain guides can actually go, and plastic pieces can start to wear down. Your engine will have a lot of slack in it, and you could also have a lot of plastic piece down in your oil sump. Alright guys, and the other thing you also need to do is you just need to verify the cost of the starter motor. Now that doesn't need to be replaced, but in case it does fail on some vehicles, the starter motor is relatively easy to replace. Where my hand is, yep, that's the starter motor right there. Now on certain vehicles it's quite hard to replace, but on this vehicle it's relatively easy to replace. Alright guys, the other thing you need to find out is on the vehicle that you're going to purchase, what type of transmission it has. Your conventional automatic transmission, your CVT transmission, which is a continually variable transmission, or your dual clutch transmission. Now the CVT transmissions are good, but they can be very costly to repair if they go wrong. So my suggestion is to go for a conventional transmission. Now the CVT transmissions have got a steel belt across the gearbox, and that can be quite expensive to repair as well. Alright guys, the other thing also is you may have heard that on transmission fluids in vehicles that they are for the life of the gearbox. That is not entirely true. Now, when they say it's for the life of the gearbox, it's for the life of the warranty of the vehicle. Now, on this vehicle, you need to change the ATF fluid, the automatic transmission fluid, at 90,000 kilometers. That's what the manufacturer suggests, but most manufacturers says you don't need to, and that's not always the case for all the transmissions. So that's something you need to take into account. The other thing you need to also take into account is a service history. Now, just because somebody tells you that something has been done is good, but you also want to have some sort of proof. So ask them for any service records or any receipts for the work that they have done. Alright guys, we are now here with my BMW. So this is a 2006 BMW 330i. Now you know how I was talking about the valve cover gaskets that can leak sometimes? Now if you look at it here, right where I'm pointing, if you see that little orange color bit there, that's what you call the valve cover gaskets. You know how I was talking about power steering? This is a hydraulic power steering. Alright, so now as you can see, if you dab that and you dab it right here, and you shut it back in again, and you take it out, you can see that it's a little low on power steering fluid. But if you look on the inside there, and I just take a little dot like that, and I touch it, you can see that this fluid is relatively clear. So that is still relatively good fluid. Now, this one is not that low. You just need to be able to touch the tip. So it's not too bad. But as you can see, this is what your power steering fluid should look like. And if you can actually smell it as well, but don't go too close. If it smells burnt, then your power steering fluid is bad. So I'm going to put that back in there. Now the same thing goes with your transmission fluid. Now the gearbox on certain cars are steel, so you do not have a transmission dipstick. So like the Toyota Camry I showed you just now, there's no transmission dipstick. And on this BMW as well, there's no transmission dipstick. So what you have to do is you have to look at service records to actually see if that has been done, because there's no way for you to actually check the condition of the fluid without going under the vehicle, opening the filler plug, and then taking a sample from there. The water pump is located right down here. It is pretty hard to see it, and you have got to go under the car to replace it. That water pump and that thermostat is electronically driven. Those water pumps are prone to failure around 75,000 to 80,000 miles. and this car has done 75,000 miles. And on the BMWs, you can see you have got an engine oil filter housing. Now, certain German cars also have got this kind of thing. You need to look for leaks around this area. So that's your engine oil filter, your oil cooler. There's a gasket in between here, and there's a gasket in between your engine block. Now, if that leaks, it will drop onto the serpentine belt, and if it gets onto the serpentine belt, the belt will slip and will get consumed by the engine, and you could have some catastrophic engine damage. Alright guys, you know how earlier I was telling you that the starter motor is fairly easy to replace on the Toyota Camry? Well, on this vehicle, the starter motor is more towards the firewall of the engine. You can't actually see it from here. You'll need to take out the intake manifold right here, and then you'll need to take out all the pipings, and you'll need to go down there to replace it. Now, that is a very expensive thing to replace, so that's why I always say with the vehicle that you're going to buy, make sure the water pump, thermostat, alternator, the starter motor, and all those things, like the serpentine belt as well, and whether it's prone to cam chain failure. So if you do that research on that particular model of vehicle before you buy it, then you know exactly what to expect. And on this BMW here, now you have got your cooling system right here, your radiator down there, and now what happens is you've got a transmission cooler right down below. Again, it's really hard to see, but what can happen is because of the level of the transmission cooler, sometimes if the line cracks in between, you could get transmission fluid in your coolant and coolant in your transmission fluid. And you're going to unscrew it. And as you can see here, this is a dipstick. Now this dipstick actually moves, you can see, like so. So that means there's coolant in there. Now this BMW uses blue color coolant. So what you can do is you can take a small sample if at all the owner does allow you to. But if at all it looks all good under here, there's no fibers here, because if somebody did put some head gasket sealer, then you would see a lot of fiber, sort of crusty looking things there. Then I would just walk away. Don't bother anymore with the vehicle. Right, the other thing you also need to do is, you know how I talked about the transmission fluid can get into your coolant system? You need to take a sniff. No, it just smells a bit sweet to me, which is the typical thing of the coolant, so that's fine. There's no issues right there. Now what you want to do also is, when you start up the engine, you want to hear for any leaks or whistling sounds, or if you hear any tick 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 sound, it could be a fuel injector, it could be a worn-out timing chain guide as well. So now if you guys have any issues like that while checking a car, feel free to comment down below and I'll be able to advise you on that one. Now what I also want to do is, when you are going to start the engine, to check the engine mounts as well as the gearbox mounting, you need to get somebody into the vehicle, make them start the car, and watch the engine. Does it shake violently or does it slightly shake? If it's violent shaking, you got bad engine mounts. So now the other thing you need to do is always try to take somebody with you to actually see a car, no matter if they know nothing about vehicles, because when you are looking for something, they might actually see something that you don't. Alright guys, and as you can see there, the shake was very small. I'll just step back a bit. So the shake was very small, so that means the engine mounts are good and the mounting from the engine to the gearbox is most likely good. Now I'm going to show you guys a few things in the test drive, which is going to be in another video because it's too long a video to make into one. Now we're going to listen for any whistling sounds or any ticking sounds, anything out of the ordinary. And you can see that the serpentine belt is running straight. If your serpentine belt is actually going back and forth like that, or let's say in your front wheel drive vehicle your serpentine belt is going back and forth, then that could indicate that you have actually got some sort of pulley damage. As you can see, engine sounds perfect. Now with the serpentine belt, you always want to make sure that you see it running and it shouldn't go back and forth. Now this is the front of the engine, that's the back of the engine. And just now on the Toyota Camry, that's the front of the engine, this is the back of the engine. So the gearbox is mounted to the back that way, and on the other vehicle the gearbox is under the engine mounted, and the engine is mounted over the gearbox. Alright guys, so now the other thing you want to also make sure is in certain countries you can cross-check the engine number of the vehicle. So how do you know that this is the original engine? So if you look right there, where my middle finger, no, I won't use my middle finger, I'll use my index finger. Right here, that's the engine number. Now you can cross-check that with the documentation of the vehicle, and if that engine number matches, the likeliness is the original engine in the vehicle. Because sometimes people can actually put a higher mileage engine into a vehicle and you might not know until you check that one, because the engine number is something which corresponds with the engine. The other thing you guys want to do is you want to check that the VIN number matches what's on the vehicle as well. Now I'll go on my Toyota Camry now and I'm going to show you what the engine number looks like on that car. Now this is your 2AR FE engine. So as you can see, so you can't actually look at it, but I'm going to point to it. It's right down there where my middle finger is, down here, just a bit further down. You can see that this is your engine number there, and it's etched into the engine block. So what you can do is you just need to check that that number matches the vehicle. Alright guys, the other thing you also want to make sure is that when you start the engine, you turn on the aircon compressor, and you want to make sure that you do not get any squealing sounds from the aircon compressor. It could be a pulley damage, and also you want to make sure that the aircon is nice and cool. Alright guys, so that's why you need to check the air conditioner compressor as well. So as you can see, the crank pulley is around there where my hand is pointing. Now the aircon compressor is this one right there. So you can see that big circular looking thing down here where my hand is, where my finger is. That's where the aircon compressor is. And that compressor, when I cross-checked it on the side, as you can see, right here where my finger is pointing, there's a little date code on that one, and the compressor says that it's been replaced in 2020, and the aircon was also recharged, because I do have some invoices from that from the previous owner. So the air conditioning system on European cars can be extremely expensive to repair. So these are the things you need to take a look at. So I got a fairly new compressor and I've got it regassed, so I don't have much to worry about. Alright guys, and when you are going to start up the vehicle for the first time, what you need to do is slot the key in or put the key into the ignition, and you're going to turn it into the run position. You can see all the engine lights have come on, your check engine light, your ABS, your stability control light, everything. You want to make sure that when you start that, it all goes off. Okay, and as you can see, the only remaining one is the seat belt. So we're going to put the seat belts on. And the only other remaining one will be the handbrake. So I'm just going to put my foot on the brake and release the handbrake. And as you can see, there are no other lights on now. You always want to make sure that you definitely do see all of these, because if somebody has put a tape on it, you will not see that at the startup. Alright guys, so the last thing that you need to do is you want to check that you've got a OBD2 scanner that you can scan your vehicle with, and it can give you some indication as to if your car's health is good or whether there's something wrong with the vehicle. So, or you can either use this or you can use a cheaper OBD2 scanner. Now this one will just plug directly in, and this one needs a smartphone connectivity. So I'm going to plug that in right now. Alright guys, as you can see, I now have my Blue Driver on. Now what you guys need to do is you just need to click on read codes, and now it's going to scan the whole vehicle, and scan has been successful. Continue. So you can see there's absolutely nothing right here, and when you can go scan, and that's nothing. What we're going to do is we're going to use this conventional cheaper tool, which you all can buy, because not everyone will have a Blue Driver. Now there's nothing totally fancy about the Blue Driver, but it's a relatively good tool for the price that you pay. It says OBD2, so I can select enter. So it's going to enter, and it's going to do all the system checks of the car. MIL status is off, which means that your engine check light is not on. So you can go enter, and then you can go read codes and enter. Now it's going to process. Vehicle has no fault codes. So now what we're going to do is we're going to start the engine. Engine is started, and you're going to go exit, and then you're going to go read codes again. And what you can do is you can keep this one plugged into the vehicle, drive around, and then just check, pull over to the side of the road and check. And if at all there's no codes, then you should be good to go. Alright guys, so now I've turned off the engine. And that is the end of the first part of how to purchase a used vehicle. So make sure you subscribe so you'll never miss another one of my videos. Thanks guys, have a great day. Bye.